Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing the mid-year freakout tag, but I have tweaked it just a little bit. I've gone ahead and decided to forego the questions that I feel like I don't really have a genuine answer for, or the ones that I don't feel particularly pertain to me as a reader or the types of books that I've read so far. But that's okay because I have a few other things that I want to do in this video, and those things are to go over my overall reading stats for the year so far and give you a quick look at my reading journal and how I use it to keep track of the number of pages that I've read, because I've noticed with Storygraph and Goodreads that there is a little bit of an inconsistency in how it tracks page numbers compared to the way that I like to track them. So we're going to talk about how I track certain stats for myself. So yeah, let's get right into it. So the first question we have is, what's the best book that you've read so far? For me, that book has been A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. This is the first of the books in the element of cadence duology. I have talked about this book quite a few times on my channel so far, but it's a fantasy book about a bard named Jack who teams up with a childhood rival of his named Adaria to try to figure out what is happening to a bunch of girls on their island who mysteriously go missing. I absolutely loved the writing style of this book. I was engaged throughout the whole thing. I loved the story itself, the world, the lore, the characters, and pretty much everything about it. I didn't even mind the romance, and if you watched anything on my channel or have read my book blog, which I'll link down below by the way if you're interested in that, you'll know that I'm not a huge romance fan, especially when the book itself isn't in the romance genre. So yeah, that's saying a lot for me. I am a relatively new fantasy reader, and I can't exactly talk about how this book relates or stands up to other fantasy books out there, but it definitely was a lot better than the other few fantasy books that I've recently read. So it got me interested in reading fantasy more, and yes, I would just highly recommend this book. This transitions into the next question, which is the best sequel I've read so far. This is the only sequel that I've read so far this year, but I do think that it deserves a mention because I loved it so much, and that is A Fire Endless by Rebecca Ross. I'm not going to say too much about the plot of this book because it will give away what happens in A River Enchanted, and I would highly recommend that you guys read that book if you haven't already. But what I will say about this book is it was a great follow-up to A River Enchanted, and I was 100% thoroughly happy with the way each event in the book played out in the end, and I can't say that for many follow-up books, not even Harry Potter, which is my favorite series of all time. The next question is, what is a new release you haven't read yet but want to? So for this one, I'm definitely going to have to go with The Mysterious Case of the Apperton Angels by Janice Hallett. This was on my January most anticipated list. I will link that video up above and down below for you if you're interested in that, but Janice Hallett is my new favorite author. I read both of her books last year and absolutely loved them, and I've been wanting to read this particular book since it came out, obviously, but it hasn't been available at my library yet, and I've been a little tight on money so far this year, so I haven't been able to go ahead and order the book, but I loved Janice Hallett's other books so much that I'm honestly not afraid to go ahead and just buy the book before having read it. Even though the plot description of this one isn't drawing me in as much as the other two books have that she's written, it is an epistolary novel, which is my favorite type of book to read. So I'm still really looking forward to it. The other book that I have on my radar that I really want to read that's a new release is Vera Wang's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Q. Santanto. This book just seems like it's going to be really fun. It's been on my radar since before it came out, and I definitely want to get to it really soon. So the next question that I'm going to answer is, what has been the biggest disappointment so far? And for this one, I am going to have to go with Do I Know You by Emily Wibberley and Austin Sigmund Broca. I was so looking forward to this book when I read the synopsis of it. It was near the top of my most anticipated books for January, which again is saying a lot for me because I'm not a huge romance reader. But the premise just sounded so interesting to me, and I was excited to read it. The premise is we have our two characters named Eliza and Graham who are going away for their 5th-year wedding anniversary. Even though they've been married for only 5 years, they are already starting to go distant from each other, and they have just pretty much lost the spark in their marriage. Then, their first night on this vacation, a stranger who doesn't realize that the two are married introduces Eliza and Graham to each other. And from that point on, in hopes of reigniting their spark, Eliza and Graham pretend that they have, in fact, just met each other. The premise of this was something that I thought was going to be very cute and interesting, and I thought there was going to be a lot of room for fun and witty banter. But unfortunately, in my opinion, the book ended up being a lot more of a book that was more so in the characters' heads rather than about the actual plot of the book. I was bored a lot during my time reading this book, and I also found myself skipping over page after page without having missed anything. And this book is also a good example of why I don't like multiple perspectives a lot of the time, because in this book, we get the character's feelings and point of view of what happened in the other character's chapter, if that makes sense. I can understand, I think, what the authors were going for, because they probably wanted us to get a sense of who the characters are, which I totally appreciate. But I'm sorry, it was just a little bit too much for me in this book. While I wasn't a huge fan of the book, I do think that the book was well written, however. Like, I think both of these authors can write. I did write a book blog post about this book, which I'll link down below if you're interested in that. I did go into a lot more detail in that blog post, but yeah, this book really, really disappointed me, unfortunately. Next, we have the book that was the biggest surprise, and once again, we're going to go with A River Enchanted, mostly because I honestly wasn't expecting to love this book as much as I did when I picked it up, or when I put it on my TBR for that matter. Again, I'm not a huge fantasy reader, so I wasn't sure what to expect, and I didn't necessarily think I was gonna hate it or anything like that, but I didn't think that I would like it as much as I did. But honestly, from the first chapter, I found myself hooked and wanting to read more of it to see what would happen next. And yeah, I was not expecting to think it was as good or as memorable as it ended up being for me. Next up, we have favorite new author, whether it be a debut or new to you. I'm going to tweak this question a little bit. I'm going to call it best new author. Again, my answer is related to the elements of cadence duology. I'm going to go with Rebecca Ross. I haven't read any other books by her yet, so I'm not exactly sure if I would say that she's my favorite. I will definitely be going through some of the books she's already written to see if another book has a premise that I'm interested in. And I will definitely be keeping an eye out for new material by her as well. The next question I'm actually surprised I have an answer for, and that is the newest fictional crush. I'm typically not someone who develops crushes on characters I read for the most part. TV shows and movies are definitely a different story. But I just finished the book Tripping Arcadia, and because of this book, I'm going to say that I did develop a bit of a crush on one of the characters. I'm not going to go into too much as to what I thought about the book itself, because I will get more into that in my June wrap up, so stay tuned for that. Once it's up, though, I will link it up above and down below for you if you're watching this before it's out. But if it weren't for Tripping Arcadia, I would not have an answer to this question. The character that I'm talking about that I had a little bit of a crush on is Jonathan Tradeux. I hope I'm not butchering that. I'm terrible with French. But I don't know exactly what it was that made me have a crush on him a little bit. You know what? It was probably because he liked to read, and also the types of books that he liked to read. He drags his family to a different part of the state so he can go to his childhood home and read at one point. And honestly, there's nothing sexier than that to me. I started crushing on him from there on out. Even though he was kind of a jerk for a lot of the book, I just thought he was attractive because of the fact that he liked to read. I don't know. That probably says something about me. He quotes a line from Mary Shelley at one point in the book, and I just thought it was sexy. I'm going to be writing a blog post about this book here soon. Once that's up, I'll leave a link about it down below. But yeah, That's my newest fictional crush. So the next book we have is Book That Made You Cry, and I definitely cried towards the end several times during How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. This book deals a lot with grief and remembering loved ones who have passed away, and there's this one part in particular near the end that the second I read it made me cry because it was related to that. And the other time I cried, I'm not going to get into because it contains spoilers for the book, but yeah, I'm not going to say it's a particularly sad book or anything like that. In fact, I actually laughed a lot during my time reading this book as well, but it's just some of the issues that are dealt with in this book that made me cry. The last question that I'm going to answer for the tag itself here is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? For this question, I'm going to list the rest of the books that are on my January most anticipated list. The reason why is because I didn't intend for that video to become a full-blown project and make up most of my TBR for the bulk of the year, but I'm really determined to go ahead and finish, or at least give all the books on that list a chance. So those books that I haven't yet gotten to are The Blue Bar by Damayanti Biswas, The Hunter by Jennifer Herrera, The Things That We Do to Our Friends by Heather Darwin, and once again, The Mysterious Case of the Apperton Angels. And then there's one more book that I really want to get into, and that is The Perfect Score by A.M. Ellis. This book was on my February TBR. I'll link that video up above if you're interested in that, as well as down below, because I go into a lot more detail as far as what this book is about in that video. But pretty much this is a hunter killer book, and I was really excited about it, and I'm still very excited about it. Hunter Killer is pretty much a subscription box where you're given a bunch of clues and put them together to solve a mystery, and this book is part of a few books that are kind of an offshoot of that. It's a mystery book, and it does have some epistolary elements to it, which, as I mentioned, I absolutely love that. And I can't afford Hunter Killer right now, so this is going to be the next best thing. And yeah, it's super short, so I honestly don't have an excuse. So yeah, those are the questions that I wanted to answer for the mid-year freakout tag. I'm sorry that I had some repeat answers for some of them, but I wanted to keep this as authentic as possible for you guys. And I really liked the elements of cadence duology. And to be honest, a lot of the books that I've read thus far this year have been lukewarm at best, and I've also had quite a few DNFs so far for this year, so why not call out the books that I actually liked, right? So now I want to talk a little bit about my reading stats so far. I'm going to pull up screenshots from my Storygraph, which I will link down below for you if you wanted to add me on there. I update what I'm reading in real time on there, as well as Goodreads, and you can see a sneak peek at what other books are on my radar as well. But yeah, so far, as you can see, I had a goal of reading 30 books, which may not be as ambitious as a lot of book goals that may be out there, but I honestly go through a lot of reading slumps during the year, so I wanted to keep that goal as realistic as I could for the type of reader that I am. I also only read physical books, and apparently can be a little bit of a slow reader in general as far as the amount of pages I could read in a certain amount of time. So with all that considered, I just set myself a goal of 30 books, and I'm ahead by 2 books right now. And if I didn't DNF so many books so far this year, I would be way more ahead than that, but it is what it is. The good news is last year I read 15 books total, and here we are mid-year, and I've already read 15 books, so I think that's pretty cool. But yeah, talking about the DNFs, let's see how many of those that I have had so far this year. Looks like there were 6. This is definitely going to be a sneak peek of my June wrap up, but it is what it is. We have You Must Remember This by Kat Rosenfield, The Black House by Carol Johnstone, All the Dangerous Things by Stacey Willingham, Just the Nicest Couple by Mary Kabaika, A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, and Finley Donovan is Killing It by Elle Casamano, which I know is an unpopular opinion, but I'm sorry, I just didn't like that book at all. I go into more detail as to why in my winter wrap up, which I'll link up above and down below, but I actually wanted to add Finlay Donovan is Killing It to the book that I was most disappointed in, but I didn't finish it, so I didn't think it was fair to count that towards the superlatives, but let's just say it made honorable mention to that question. These are what the types of moods that the books I've read so far have been, and according to Storygraph, I've read 5,882 pages so far this year at the time of filming this, but as I mentioned, I'm pretty sure that's inaccurate, which I will get into in a little bit. But for now, I tend to apparently lean more towards dark, mysterious, and tense type of books, which makes sense given the fact that I do tend to read mystery thrillers mostly. As far as pace is concerned, I tend to read more medium paced books. These are the genres that I lean more towards, which again, thriller is high up there. As far as the numbers are concerned, I am delving a little bit more into fantasy than I have in the past, so that makes perfect sense to me that that's what's next up. I'm not a huge romance reader, so I think it's interesting that that category is number 3. But when I clicked on the little bar to see what it was that caused that high number, I saw A River Enchanted and A Fire Endless were sorted under that category. I'm honestly not 100% sure if I agree with that, because even though there was definitely a romance factor in both books, I don't think it necessarily overtook it in order to be considered part of that genre. But that's just my opinion, and that's okay. It is what it is. I love those books anyway, as I've mentioned so many times throughout this video. My best reading month so far has been April, and my worst month was March, which makes sense because I unfortunately did not read at all during March, as corroborated by this little note in my reading journal here. So now we are going to move on to the number of pages that I've read so far this year. So first of all, this one portion of my pages read so far is listed as 5,880, and over here it's listed as 5,822. So I'm guessing the one here on the graph that shows the format is just rounded, because the difference between the two of these is only 58 pages. And with the number of books that I DNF'd, I definitely read more than a total of 58 pages with them combined. So I know that the difference isn't what I read in DNFs. I'm pretty sure that the number of pages that I've read in books that I did DNF don't count towards the total number of pages that Storygraph is saying I read, which is fine, but that's why I like to keep a separate reading journal to actually keep track. I started this reading journal on January 8th, but I did read a little bit during the first few days of January that I didn't record in this journal, but I did keep track on Storygraph those number of pages that I did read. Using that information plus what's written in my physical reading journal, my actual page count for this year so far is 5,671. Also, on both Goodreads and Storygraph, I've noticed some inconsistencies as to the number of pages that the book is displayed as having on these websites versus the number of pages that the book actually has. I always make sure I'm really picky about the editions that I mark as to what I'm currently reading on Goodreads and Storygraph. I always go to the ISBN number to make sure that I'm tracking the correct book edition with the correct number of pages, but even then I notice the page numbers are inaccurate. I'm going to use as an example here the book The Coward by Stephen Arion, which unfortunately is not going to be counted towards the page count, nor will it be a nomination for any of the superlatives in this video, because I just started reading it and I really want this video to be up before the tail end of June, and I'm not sure how long it's going to take me to finish this book, but it serves as a perfect example of what I'm talking about as far as the inconsistencies with using Storygraph to track the page numbers. Here is the ISBN of the edition of The Coward that I have, and you'll see that it matches the ISBN that is listed on Storygraph, but Storygraph says that the book has only 400 pages, whereas the story itself has more than that, and we're not even counting the acknowledgments or sample chapters. Also, I personally don't read the acknowledgments or any supplemental material at the back of books, and I never count that towards my page count. And I think a lot of times Storygraph and Goodreads do count that towards page count.
So as you can see, there are more than 400 pages in this book, even within the story. It's not like they were counting the acknowledgments and previews of other books in this. So yeah, definitely over 400 pages in this book, even though the ISBN on Storygraph says that there are 400 pages in this very same book.
So here's a quick look at my reading journal to show you how I keep track of the number of pages that I've actually read. Please ignore my sloppy handwriting, by the way.
So I'm just going to give you guys a quick look into my reading journal. It's just a regular composition book. I've been using it since January, and I was still kind of developing my process for logging things, but I finally settled on something recently that is more set, and it's how I keep a track of what I read pretty much. So I pretty much write the name of the book, the page numbers to which I read. Sorry about that. This is giving me a difficult type focusing, but anyway, I write the number of pages in pink here, and then at the end of the week, I write the number of pages that I've read. So in order to figure out how many pages I read, I did a combination of just going through and adding all of these totals up. And then for the books that I read before I started this journal, which was on January 8th, I did read a little bit in the days leading up to those. So I just went ahead and looked at my Storygraph at the numbers of pages I read based on that. So I just added up all those numbers, and that's how I got to the page number that you have seen. I just wanted to clarify something I said in the little clip that I just showed you about my reading journal when I said I went to Storygraph to calculate the number of pages that I read before I started the reading journal. I just wanted to show you guys how I was able to go and figure out how many pages those were that I read. So I just went to here. We're going to go to, say, this reading of the Paris apartment that I did on January 2nd. So as we know, I was not keeping track in my physical reading journal, but this is my reading journal on Storygraph. So all I did was I pressed edit on that day, and you could just see right there it says pages read and last sitting. And I'll show you how I confirmed that that was correct, because the day that I started my physical reading journal was January 8th, and if I press edit right here, it says that I read 43 pages that day. And then if I go here to my reading journal, I read Ordinary Monsters that day. It confirmed the same number of pages, 43. So that's just how I used Storygraph to calculate the number of pages that I read before I started this physical reading journal.
I'm not here to trash talk Storygraph or Goodreads, by the way. I love both of those websites so much. I just don't rely solely on their numbers when tracking my page count. And my whole point of saying all that was that, yes, the number of pages that I'm being told I've read so far was 5,882, but it's actually 5,671. So that number is counting the DNFs that I read and not counting pages like acknowledgments, sample chapters, etc. So yeah, that's all that I wanted to talk to you guys about today. Let me know in a comment down below what your answers to the questions in this tag are. And hey, if you wanted to leave a little bit about what your reading stats are so far down below, feel free to add that as well. And I in no way, shape, or form expect anyone to get as micro as I did about it. Using stats from a tracking app is obviously more than fine. They do, as you can see, land in right around the same ballpark. If you read any of these books that I mentioned, feel free to let me know about that as well. I would love to talk to you guys about these books and the books that you've been reading. I'll leave a link to my book blog down below if you're interested in that as well. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.